You joined us for Rain of Blood, and together we made it rain bigger and better than we could have ever imagined. So now, join us for a second blazing inferno of knowledge and exploration. You're listening to Rain of Fire, the scorching sequel event to Rain of Blood, where we're going to delve into the world of fire play education and safety as we prepare for the upcoming Rain of Fire event. Join your host, Miss Kitten, Radically Dark, and Ember Solaris as we ignite your curiosity and stoke the flames of passion with discussions, interviews, and authentic insights from around the globe. Together, we're three flames united in one mission to make quality kink education more accessible and open pathways to conversation and connection about edgeplay topics around the world. But before we dive into these sizzling topics, a content warning. Rain of Fire discusses mature themes, explicit content, and practices related to BDSM and fireplay. So listener discretion is advised, and this is an adult-only podcast. Other topics may include mental health, trauma, consent, and more. So please be sure you're in a good spot to engage in these topics before continuing to listen. So, grab your fire gear, stoke the flames of curiosity, and let's embark on this crackling journey together. Welcome to Rain of Fire.
Hey, amazing firebugs. Welcome back. And you are in the dungeon today with Miss Kitten, all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, and Mr. Fox. How exciting. Really, really pleased to welcome this incredible guest to my dungeon virtually. Welcome, and we're really pleased to have you and really grateful for your time today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. This should be a lot of fun.
Yay. So before we get into why we brought you here, Deep Dark Secrets, maybe you can just give the listeners and myself a little brief introduction to how you got started in this crazy world of BDSM, and how fire came into your journey.
Sure. So I will acknowledge that I'm a bit of a statistic, unfortunately. While many people get into BDSM purely because it's a thing they're curious about, purely because it's a thing they're interested in, I did the same. Unfortunately, I was way too young at that time, and my experiences as a result of the wonders of the internet when I was way too young on it weren't so great. Thankfully, though, as I got older and started being more on my own, I was able to connect with my local kink, BDSM, non-monogamous alternative community. I'm actually very privileged in that I'm on the East Coast of the U.S., based in between Baltimore and D.C., and going back decades at this point, this area has always had at least 2, if not up to 4, semi-private, but still technically, many of them are membership only, but they are still open to new members. And it is full-on BDSM and kink and alternative space clubs that have full dungeons, that have events that can be up to 200 people on a single night in the space. And then from there, I started getting more involved. I started helping to host events and running events. And I did that very, very extensively from about 2012 to 2020. I'm one of the few organizers in the area who ever hosted multiple regularly scheduled events at all of the major public venues at the same time. And in the last 2 to 4 years, I have been slowly taking more time for myself and figuring out what feels good, but I'm still very much involved in aspects of the community. And for me, fire very much was a thing that came about through the community. I grew up always having some sort of fireplace in the home or in a friend's home or something. And so I grew up around the fireplace and bonfires and people being communal around this fire. I'm also an anti-Zionist Jew, so I grew up celebrating Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, lighting candles, and all of that means as well. And as I got more involved in my local kink community, especially as I started to get to know people better, I found my way into a group that was and is still called as cigars, boots, and chocolate. And it's essentially a leather and cigar social club that when I first got involved in the community, in some cases would meet monthly at different cigar shops in the area. Many of the cigar shops in the area, the front is some sort of actual retail store where you can buy different cigars, and then they have an actual smoking lounge, usually separated by a literal door, so that way there's not like secondhand smoke inhalation. And some of these places were rather large. They would have multiple TVs. They had a lot of large leather furniture that everyone got to sit on. They had private lockers if you wanted to become a member, so you could store your stuff there. And I think I was probably about maybe 2 to 3 years into the public community at that time. And this group became a place where a lot of organization happened because, well, what better way to talk about the wonderfully opulent and depraved things that we're going to do than in a place where literally we can sit on a leather piece of furniture, our bottom can sit on the floor, we can have a bit of scotch and a cigar and really connect. And I feel like that's a very, admittedly, it might be more of a white or imperial thing, but the idea of sitting around with cigars and brandy and smoking and talking and whatever is something that it probably comes from very unfortunate places. I don't think it's usually acknowledged in those spaces quite as much. And so from that group, I started getting more involved in some of the local summer events that would happen at actual campgrounds. So there was large fires and things like that. And as I got more involved, I learned more about how the fire of cigar play, in particular the fire of a cigar, is very unique because it is both simultaneously an active flame, but in some ways it's a passive one, in that it's not the same as a flame off of a candle or a torch. It is something that is slowly combusting on its own. But it very much, especially if you put enough air into it and use it in very close spaces, can have the intensity, if not more, of an open flame or something that has been superheated, and in many ways can be used to either seal an experience or seal a memory or seal a ritual, kind of like people used to do with sealing wax on letters, to being something that is much more almost superficial and sensory, in that realistically, if a cigar is lit, you're going to feel the heat from the flame around the edge of the cigar where it's lit, bringing that close to people's skin, exhaling smoke onto their skin or into their hair even, or into their face. And there's a number of ways that cigar play, cigar burn, cigar ritual. And I fully acknowledge that I'm purely the person who connected with you on social media in terms of like what this can be about. And as I have said privately, I will absolutely send more people who are probably a little more, or not probably, who are more experienced your way as well to speak on these topics, because I don't want to say I am the expert on all of these things when there are definitely people who know more than me. So yeah.
That was super authentic. You said so much that I didn't know about cigars just in that short little intro. So I've got the biggest grin on my face and I'm super excited. And I'm quite sure there's people that know more than all of us put together in about everything else in the world. But it's lovely just to hear authentic stories. So I value your share and I'm really grateful for your time today.
Thank you.
But I would need to go back like a couple of steps. First of all, from a commitment to community side, like I really value that you've spent so much time as an organizer. I find the role is incredibly taxing, and I think anybody who does it for an extended period of time needs to be commended. I think there is too few people who stand up and take service in the community. So I just wanted to extend my gratitude for that, because I think it makes a difference. And then just listening to you talk about the community and 200 people in a venue, and it's insane. The tradition that you guys are carrying on and offering as a legacy is truly beautiful. And I think you sometimes get lost in the humdrum of all of it and you don't see it. But coming from a community where we are quite new and less established, it's really beautiful to hear that there's legacy being passed on. That leather community is something we don't really experience in a big way down here. So it's really beautiful to be given a window into it and to see it. And then that idea that you can sit and you can talk and that the cigar lends itself to that environment. I relate to that a little bit because they're the one item which I found strangely make me want to donate my time to the experience. They have a calming effect. Like they set a tone, and they give you they give you sort of an aura that they produce on their own. And I really enjoyed that about them. So I can picture them being quite subjective to a glass of something good to drink and a good chat with a friend, because I think you'd be present for that just because you're present for the experience of the cigar. So yeah, I love that. So maybe you can talk to me a little bit more about all of the rest of the stuff you spoke about and the actual rituals. The rituals that go on. You touched a little bit about using the cigar to seal an experience, and that for me was something that's quite beautiful. So maybe we can go into that a little bit, and you can tell me a little bit more about what that looks like.
Absolutely. I do want to take 1 second to acknowledge, going back to what you're saying about the intentionality, about the time that goes into enjoying a cigar. That's actually something that is, there are books written on this subject, because cigars are very much made to be a thing that is dependent on what sort of experience you want to have. There are cigars that are shorter or more narrow that realistically you're going to smoke them. Even if you're taking your time, they're going to be done in 5 minutes. And then there are cigars that even if you're rushing, they may still take an hour and a half to fully burn. And cigars have 3 different sections of flavor as the burn continues down the cigar stick itself. So it very much is a thing of, do I actually have the time to invest into this fully? What does that look like? Am I okay only smoking half a cigar? And what does that mean for, can I save the cigar for later, and so on? So there's a bunch there as well. In terms of cigars being used to signify, to ritual, to seal, there are a number of things that go into that. As a white person, I'm only going to briefly acknowledge that realistically, the act of consuming something in fire, sealing something in fire, doing ritual around something in fire is something that has gone throughout history across almost every civilization, across almost every culture. Fire in of itself, which, I mean, y'all literally are talking about a podcast and events about fire and blood and so on. And all these things are very much connected in that they all go back to connecting with ourselves, connecting with the land, connecting with our sense of intention and spirituality. Many cigars, especially if they're not infused in any way, shape, or form, if they don't have any flavors added to them, all it is plant matter. Which means that it is usually, that's why human ashtrays where people are having the ash put out on their tongue and then they eat the actual ash, it's all technically organic matter. There isn't any added chemicals to it beyond things that would naturally occur as the leaves are aged over time. And so much so that cigar ash, while you're going to have a variety of ranging of how your body responds to it, there are some people who really like putting that into actual blood and open wounds. It can create a keloid in scarring sometimes. A lot of the time, the body is just able to sort of push it out, so it doesn't really have that effect. But there are a number of ways that, much like ash, or it is literally cigar ash, the most prevalent thing that comes to mind, which of course is not actually probably what we're talking about here, but like Ash Wednesday, where the people who observe Ash, whatever day it is, they have the cross in ash on their forehead. The act of something being burned to completion, and in some ways there's a purification aspect to it. Even those ashes can be used. And the nice thing about cigars is that when they burn, different cigars are packed differently, and the way they are packed is going to affect how much they can maintain their shape even once they've been burned. So there are even ways where you can focus on enjoying a cigar while holding it, So at some point, ideally up to half of the cigar or more, which will still fully be in the same shape it was when it started, is entirely completely used. It's all ash, but it sort of stands as a testament to how it was made, that it holds together that well. And when we look at fire in terms of how it's used throughout history, it's been used as a way to purify things, as a way to celebrate things, as a way to seal things. I mean, who hasn't looked into an actual fire or even just a match or a candle and just sort of gotten lost in the experience of seeing the fire move, seeing the fire dance? I mean, I feel like there are billion-dollar industries behind cell phones and other things that try to replicate the ability that people experience when they're just zoning out looking into a fire.
I think fire for me as a newbie, it's always been a primal force. It's always been something that draws me to it automatically. What was so interesting for me in the beginning, introducing my core team, who I play with quite often, to fire, was how fire made the whole room present. Everybody was mesmerized and present and captivated and aware. And you could feel the adrenaline and the power in the room. And it almost gave the people capacity to be present and to be aware. It was a really enlightening experience for me to see a group of adults who are pretty tired and pretty relaxed, all of a sudden a little bit on guard, a little bit aware, and completely mesmerized like children with the fire. So yeah, it definitely is a force that I think speaks to all of us, maybe in different ways, but has an ability to captivate us.
And especially is seeing how fire moves. Of all the elements, fire is one of the easiest ones to see it living, to see it breathing, to see it moving. Like if you hold a glass of water, the water is not moving unless you spin the glass. If I light a match, the fire on the match is going to move entirely on its own, based off of how it breathes, based off of where the wind is and what's blocking it. And it really is a very visceral experience for a lot of us.
Incredible. So have you had a cigar burn? Is that something that you've played with yourself in kink?
Yes. So originally it started off as people using, or for me at least, my experience, it was first introduced as not necessarily burning, but purely fire play, where people use wands that are usually made of fondue forks with a lot of gauze and other material at the end. So you can light it on fire and then you can run the fire across someone's skin. It can be a very soothing, massaging experience. It can be intimidating and scary if they want the rush of it. And it is something that very much that I actually got my start by seeing people. One person was laying on a massage table. The other person was literally holding a thing in their hand that was on fire. They would transfer the fire to their hand. They would put the hand on the body. They would transfer the fire to the body. They would follow it up with the hand to make sure the fire wasn't staying lit on the skin and burning people. And so for me, my first introduction to fire and kink was actually through that. And then as I got more involved in the community, I started having more experiences of seeing people doing cigar play, and I had heard of people doing cigar burns as either a way of like, I commit myself to you as a consensual, almost similar to a hand fasting, or in some ways a marriage ceremony. There were some people who unfortunately experienced being burned by either cigars or more likely cigarettes as something that was a non-consensual experience they had when growing up. And so recreating it consensually on their own sort of gave back a sense of power and self-control over this terrible experience, that they then had a physical reminder that they could see and go, yes, this is something that that I reclaimed for myself, that this is something I took the power back over. And so originally my first thought was, I would love to be able to have that connection, that intensity, that meaning with someone else like that. In addition to, you can use a cigar very similar that you can to a fire wand, because as long as it's lit, it's still generating heat. If you blow on it, the fire will get bigger and generate more heat. If you move it around less, it will generate less heat. And so I've always been taught and of the mindset that anything you are going to do to someone else, you need to experience yourself, not because you are going to have the exact same experience. The reality is, if I'm not a masochist, I'm not going to have the same experience getting hit as someone who is a masochist. If I'm doing a cigar burn for someone to commit to me, well, me doing it on myself, I'm not committing to anybody with that, so it doesn't necessarily feel the same. But what that then gives me is that gives me the experience of, okay, what is it like to go through that when not feeling it, when not in a good mood, when struggling to be in headspace, when having body issues, when it's too cold or it's too hot or it just doesn't feel right. And really, by doing that, you experience, unfortunately and fortunately, sort of the experience you hope will not happen for whoever you're doing that to. And I've never felt it's really appropriate to consensually do things to people that I'm not going to cause a form of harm that I can't say myself, yes, I've gone through it. I put myself through it. I know how, I at least have some experience of what that's like. And then I took some time to research beyond just what my own individual experience was and explore what that experience looks like for other people before I do that to someone else. That gives me the full range of knowledge, so I'm the most risk aware I can be.
I think it's more than just risk aware in that sense. I think to completely consent to something, and we've got to consent as a top and a bottom, we have to understand the action, and to understand the action, we need to experience it. So I completely resonate with you on that. In that, in order to have complete understanding, we need to know how it tastes, how it feels, how it smells, what the healing process is like. What I felt 3 days afterwards in my mental state towards the play, what emotions came up, how did my body react physically, what did it cost me physically, financially, emotionally, and then in order for me to calculate my risk on that, I need to calculate what I spent on myself and whether I'm prepared to ask somebody else to spend that amount out of their budget, their risk budget. So I really loved listening to you say that. Sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you. So yeah, I will also fully acknowledge this is, I was a little bit younger. I was a little more brash and a little more bold. I had a few experiences related to cigars, but also related to other types of play where I'd be talking about something that I had just done or was really excited about doing recently in the past or recently in the future. And someone would sort of push back of like, well, you don't know what it's like to go through that, so you shouldn't do it. And then I got to clap back at them and go, oh yeah, I did. Literally, here's the scar. What else do you have to say about it? And so I will fully admit that for me, there was that originally, and I'm happy that this thankfully became so much more than what it started off as. In addition to all of the wonderful ways to connect with other people, to have some sense of meaning and significance and intentionality and ritual, there was also the fact that for me, being able to say, yes, I did this to myself, it made me feel just a tiny bit of a badass, which these days I do not look at nearly the same way as I did back then, which I consider to be growth.
I love that. I love that. I think we've all been there, and I think it has a different meaning now. We also have a little bit more of a thought process before we do the thing. Well, I hope I do. I hope it's marginally better than when I was 20, because I was crazy.
That's the hope. Yep. That's the hope. We've all been there.
I love the way that you label it growth. So what does it feel like to be burnt by a cigar? What is the feeling?
So I will acknowledge that part of the reason that I participate in this activity is because I get the impression that it feels differently for me than it might for other people. I don't know really what causes it. I am someone who has experienced a broad range of physical harm and injury and sensation, and there's something about the feeling of burning. I wouldn't say that my brain likes it, but it's a lot more tolerable. It feels a lot less intense. It feels a lot less harmful than even something as simple as putting a small needle through my skin or using one of the scalpel blades to leave a very small, super shallow cut or something. For me, there's always, the real answer, of course, is that, well, burning yourself with a cigar burns. It hurts. It doesn't. It's a very intense and almost confusing sensation in some ways, because the reality of burning yourself, to some degree, it depends on how intensely you're doing that, how hot the actual cherry where the tip of the cigar is that is lit, how long you are holding it against the skin, how hard you're pushing it against the skin. All of those will affect what the sensation feels like. And then, of course, how you care for that wound after, of course, makes a big difference too. There's always sort of been a weird sense of sort of like, this is a final thing. This is a thing I'm doing that, like, I'm putting a stamp on it. I am sealing it. I am closing it. It's not usually a type of sensation that I feel accidentally. I love to cook, and there have definitely been plenty of times in the kitchen where I burn myself, but even that, it doesn't really register as the same as intentionally choosing to prep a cigar, cut a cigar, light a cigar, and then enjoying the cigar up to a point, and then choosing where and placing that cigar burn. I've pretty much in the past, every time I've done this for myself, I have almost always, there's a lot that goes into it, the 12 hours up to it, the 24 hours up to it. I'm usually in a more contemplative state. I usually try to find a time where this is not something where I'm going to be surrounded or distracted by other people. So if it was something that I did in a public setting, such as some of the summer events that are held at different campgrounds or other spaces, sometimes I'd be waiting until 2 or 3 in the morning when I really had genuine privacy, because everyone else was either asleep or occupied. I could be in a public space, but I didn't have to deal with a bunch of people on looking or seeing what I was doing. And it was a very personal and intimate experience for me, where usually I did it towards the end of the summer or towards the end of an event season. And that would be a very meditative space for me, where I would really look back on, okay, what have I experienced? What has changed? What has grown? What do I want to hold on to in this? Because it's not just of, oh, look, I burned my skin. No, it's I sealed I put these things into me. I sealed these concepts, these thoughts, this intention into my body, into my skin through this mark that realistically, from what I know of my body, if I use a standard size cigar and I haven't like really spent the last 5 minutes just constantly sucking or blowing air into it so it gets like white hot, but it is instead more standard heat range, that cigar burn and the scar from it will last upwards up to a year, sometimes more. And so there was not only this aspect of this is something that I am doing to close out this past period of time, but I then had the coming year where I would not only see it and have those reminders, but when it was something that I was doing on a more annual basis, I was actively choosing the same spot over and over again. So in some ways, I was building on scar tissue, which technically speaking is something that can be very medically risky if not done very carefully. I thankfully was usually in a situation where I was able to address the immediate burn, so that way it wouldn't continue to burn more, because once the heat is transferred into the skin, you have to remove that heat before it really starts healing. And I was able to do what I need to care for the cigar burn in ways that when it was no longer in the immediate healing stage, when it had been a few days, when things were a little more stable, I would then either, usually underwater in a shower or something like that, I would remove the scab so that way it would scar a little bit more. And when I was doing that consistently annually, it was a thing where by the end of the year, the scar would only be a small patch of skin that if you knew where to look and ran your fingers over it, you would feel a slightly different texture. It would feel slightly raised, but it wouldn't be a blatant, obvious scar. It wouldn't be this big, obvious thing that you could even see from 15, 20 feet away. And so it really became a personal experience for me of this is not only what I have been trying to intentionalize and keep as a value for me for this past year, this is something that is going to stay with me for this coming year. And then at the end of this, I will build on it again with another burn.
I love
a lot
that.
of people do that very differently. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I resonate so much with that. Like, the self-stab for me is something I find incredibly empowering for the same reasons as you're describing, that set out of intent, the deciding on the pattern, on the marking, the process leading up to it. It's not just a haphazard chaos, accidental thing. And then for me, there is a lot of empowerment in the caring of the area afterwards, and that ability to care for that means that I'm caring for myself better. So for me, it's become incredibly empowering, because it's meant that I have to be present with myself for the activity, which is great for me. There was a time in my life when that was incredibly hard. It has got easier through the kink has actually given that to me as one of its gifts. And then just, the self-care came with that. The making sure that the canvas was looked after became really vitally important. And then just the appreciation for how my body heals, and being present to watch my body heal and watch the journey of that skin as it repairs itself, and watching the journey of the marks, because I think there's a lot that goes into it. In watching them develop, they almost have their own journey. It's an incredibly beautiful thing to see the body be able to do something so incredibly powerful, like heal itself, and I get a lot of appreciation out of that. So I relate a lot to that, and that self-stab for me is definitely something that I want to be in my own space to do, more than anything, because I want to be present with myself. And I think there was a time in my life where I wasn't actively present with myself. So I think it's growth. Used that word earlier. I'm now stuck on it. I think it's growth, but I think there is something terribly beautiful about being able to consciously do something with intent, and then maintain a relationship with that until you've got, until it's almost disappeared. So I loved listening to you talk about how the scar changed over time, but you as the person with the intent and the person that did it knew it was there, and it still had a meaning to you. And I found that incredibly beautiful. And I love that. And I think there's a finality with a burn that there isn't with a needle. Like I think there is something like, there's just something about fire that, like, it's made my personal, the idea of like this acronym that everybody talks about, PRIC, personal responsibility, informed consensual kink. Like, that's great. Like, I always feel like I'm good at my research. I'm really motivated about my risk management and stuff like that. But the personal responsibility, when you are putting something onto somebody else that could scar them for a lifetime, it changes the entire aspect of the play. It really does. It's really a lot more. And fire just has that capacity to say to you, hey, are you really with me on this? Is this really your choice? Did you really make a good decision here? And what is your responsibility in this? How's this looking for you? Where I've never experienced that same presence with another kink. Fire definitely has explained personal responsibility to me in this incredible way. It's just a bit awe-inspiring, I think.
I agree. Very much so.
Yeah, so listening to you talk about your journey is absolutely beautiful. Tell me a bit about cigar service, and not I might be terming it wrong. Like, I'm not the cutting of the cigar or something like that, but the more like from a perspective, if you are being served by somebody, what would you expect from a human ashtray? Or if you are the human ashtray, what is that experience like? And what's important there? I have no first-hand knowledge to base this on at all. I could be using the wrong terminology.
I don't think you are. At least there's nothing that you said that I didn't understand or was connected to. So cigar service, of course, much like any other service, depends on the person receiving the service, and in some ways also depends on the medical status of the person providing that service, which absolutely plays out in any aspect. When it comes to cigar service, everyone, of course, has their own preferences of whether they want their cigars to be cut with a a straight cut or a V cut. There are a number of different ways how they prefer their cigar be lit. Whether or not they want the mouthpiece, the mouth side of the cigar to be dipped in anything from just saliva to some sort of spirit to add a little bit of flavor to literally someone's internal parts. Sometimes there are a lot of people who enjoy being able to say that, yes, my cigar quite literally tastes like my bottoms or subs, flavors, juices, whatever terms feel good for them. Cigar service in terms of being a human ashtray is a very complicated thing, because what does that really mean? Does that literally just mean that's a human being holding an ashtray in their hand and the cigar is put on the ashtray? Or is it much more on the lines of the person's hand is the ashtray, or in some cases, the bottom of the person's foot or the person's tongue is the ashtray? And that very much goes beyond just service, but into a very real play aspect, because, well, if you are smoking something and something is burning, when it makes contact with the ashtray, thankfully, ashtrays don't usually have skin and nerves and sensitivity, whereas a person's hand or bottom of their foot or their chest or their tongue is going to be highly sensitive to temperature. So that is very much one of those skills and one of those types of service where I really do strongly recommend that before the bottom even provides that service of offering that flesh to hopefully be a safe container for the ash that is either then tossed away or eaten, or used for another purpose, it is very easy for the top or the dominant, the person smoking the cigar, to do more harm than is intended. Because, well, first there is the edge of the cigar, or the edge of the ash that was lit first. That's still going to be warm. That's still going to be possibly hot, depending on how hot the cherry, the actual lit part, is. And then once that breaks off, the part of the ash that was directly connected to the combustion, the cherry, the part that was actually lit, can be very hot. And so, especially if you're doing it on a more sensitive area, it can very easily do damage without really, there is no big oops. It is literally, oh, that was hotter than I thought. Crap, you now have a burn, possibly in a very intimate place. And so there is not only some aspect of, for the bottom safety, knowing that the top can do this to themselves. And an easy example is usually just using their own hand first to demonstrate the first time of, this is how I'm going to do it. Because if you do it too quickly, you are very likely to burn the ashtray. It is something that it needs to be a much more slow process. Usually there needs to be some moisture on the skin, because that decreases any immediate temperature. And then there's usually, it usually takes a little bit of time, because you don't want to immediately drop the ash onto the skin. You're more likely to drop embers onto the skin as well. So it is a relatively delicate thing where either the person's hand or foot or tongue needs to be relatively stable and not moving, while the person who is holding something that is lit and on fire very gently and delicately makes initial contact, puts enough motion into the cigar that it breaks between the ash and the part that is still lit. And then when they remove the cigar, that's when the ash, that's often still in some sense of a pillar in the shape of the cigar, will fall over. And so really, this isn't just a quick of just, I pull the cigar from my mouth and I just tap it once and it goes. This is something that if you really want to, it can take up to 15 minutes, during which time you are in very close contact. You are nearly face to face and you are super focused on what you're doing. And it can be a wonderfully intimate experience.
I love that. I love this whole, I really love the whole intention behind the whole act of smoking a cigar. Like, it is so, cigarettes and, they're sort of quick, normally done behind. It's in our community, we're not allowed to smoke inside or in public or anything like that. So, it's normally behind a building, and it's done quickly and almost shamefully. And whereas this act of smoking a cigar and the whole cigar service, there's so much intent behind the preparation for the time, the preparation of every act that goes into it. I mean, even just preparing a cigar to light it There's just so much intention in that. I just absolutely adore it. I love tradition. I love legacy. All of those things tick all the boxes for me. So I'm finding this incredibly beautiful. Not gonna lie, I also find it quite sexy that as a girl smoking a cigar in a room full of men who don't expect that, I think that that's also quite cool. So that also ticks my box a little bit, which sounds quite conceited, but it does.
I mean, the world is dominated by men who usually insist that they know what is better, even when they don't. In a similar type of play, I know that if you go to most dungeons and you have a whip, if you are a AFAB person, if you were born with breast tissue that will grow beyond what men do, and if you have internal genitalia, the second you have a whip, there are going to be half a dozen guys with whips trying to tell you how they think you should throw your whip, even if they have no idea what they're doing. And that somewhat happens with cigars as well. So you being able to, as I said sort of before, being able to clap back, being able to show that, no, I am just as competent and comfortable in this space as you are. You don't get to look down on me like you might other people. Like that's, I can't blame you. I think a lot of people in a similar position feel that way.
I love that. But the whole act of the human ashtray, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you quickly. The whole act of the human ashtray is incredibly fucking intimate. It's incredibly intimate. It's so thought out. It's such a beautiful way to interact with somebody because every action is intentional. I really love that. There's a finality behind every action. So the intent is just more serious, which I find incredibly sexy as well. It just ticks my box.
I can't disagree, and I feel the same way. I do want to give the disclaimer. I literally talk about and teach about intention and presence and motivations and ritual behind these things. I guarantee there are plenty of people who they're not doing it wrong. It doesn't make it any less or it doesn't make it any better or other, that once they get into a routine with their bottom or their submissive or their cigar service person, it doesn't necessarily always look like that. There are definitely people and there are definitely styles of play where being a human ashtray is quite literally something that you are doing while they are engaging in a conversation with someone else and you are intentionally being ignored. Being a human ashtray can also look like literally following around your partner as they are smoking, and whenever they feel like it, without even really acknowledging anything, they can drop an ash into your hand. It's definitely harder to do that not intentionally when we're using a more vulnerable and less accessible part of the body, such as the bottom of the foot or the tongue, because it takes a little more target practice to make sure you're lined up and in that potentially narrow space. Whereas someone's hand, if their palm is up and open, it's a slightly more open area and doesn't require as much intention. So I do want to make it clear that just like with any type of play, any subject, there is going to be the full range from very intentional to much more matter of fact, and in some cases completely disconnected, because that is either also intentional or wanted, or it's the person's play style. I don't want to make it seem like all cigar players take this much intentionality and value, because a lot of them don't, and it varies depending on people involved.
I love that, and I think that that's a great reminder that kink can be calibrated. I think we sometimes forget that kink can be calibrated. I know as a CBT top, people look at my pictures and think that I can only ever do severe damage and that I am literally Satan in boots. And I can be, like, if that's what you want, and we've negotiated it and we've chatted about it. But, even something like ball busting, for instance, can actually be a sensual play. You can calibrate anything to any level. So that's a great reminder that even in the cigar kink, you need to take what works for you. And it's a great reminder that you need to negotiate this, because it can have so many different levels and so many different meanings. And you need to decide what intent you want out of the situation and this is why kink is so great, because we get the sexy negotiation time before, and we can then discuss the intent and align with our partners beforehand and make sure that that alignment is what makes the play successful and the experience successful for both of us. So I think that was a great reminder from that side. But I love the intent that you're discussing, because I think we take so little time in life to do things with intent. We do things on automatic a lot of the time. So it's really beautiful. And I think that's what I found in the whole cigar process for me, is it's just given me a bit of time out to really enjoy the experience, which sounds silly, but day-to-day life is this schedule.
We are constantly moving and going and doing.
Hey,
it's hard to have a time to sit and slow down.
Yeah, and it's lovely to plan this. It's really been a good experience. So my cigar time's not kinky yet. It's literally, I need to learn to smoke the thing before I get kinky with any of this. So my plan is to light the 2 cigars that are now living in my handbag with their little humidifier packet thing in their special sack. They are they're very precious cargo, and so that's my first step in the kink. But even just the privilege of being able to explore a different world has been really special. And then to connect with people like you across the sea and hear your story and be able to find a bit of joy in what you were saying and a bit of motivation. I think as an adult, it's always fun to learn new things and to try new things. So yeah, I just love chatting to you, and I hear the intent behind your plays, and it's beautiful. And thank you for sharing so authentically with me tonight.
Happy to. It's been a pleasure.
Mr.
If I may, one small thing that I less specific to cigars and more specific to your cigar journey. There's a brand that I really enjoy. It's called Maker's Choice. They are very affordable. They're wonderfully simply made cigars. I call these things breakfast cigars because they are very small. They're pretty narrow. They're a very light flavor. They even have vanilla infused ones that are delicious. And they go surprisingly well with a morning cup of coffee or a morning cup of tea. And really, we think of, as I said in the beginning, we think of cigars like cigars and brandy or cigars and whiskey, but you can absolutely do cigars and tea, cigars and morning breakfast. Like there's a full, wonderful range of flavors and intensities to explore.
I love that. And I think that was one of my favorite parts about buying the cigar as a complete novice, was that this woman took so much time to find out what I really wanted. Like, who does that when they sell you something these days? Who cares what you really want? They just want your money. This woman cared. She cared that it was my first time. She cared that I wanted something for X amount of smoking pleasure minutes. She cared that I liked certain flavor profiles. Like, I have to be honest, like, just that experience, like, nobody, not even my partner's taken that much time to find out what I really like in life in the last year. It was really
sometimes we don't even take that time for ourselves.
Right. And I left feeling so empowered because somebody really listened to me. See, and it sounds stupidly bizarre, but it's a rare occasion. Like, I really appreciate it. I gave them a 5-star rating on their Google review when I left the shop, because I was like, that is customer service. Like, I had the biggest smile on my face. And it was just, even that was a beautiful experience. So yeah, I think that it's just a reminder to listen to people around me a little bit more and find out what they really like out of things when I'm asking questions. That was the first reminder. And the second is to do more stuff like this, because it feels fabulous. Yeah.
Entirely, I agree.
Yeah, and just such a privilege. So I'm really looking forward to smoking my cigar on Saturday at the cigar club, which I've managed to track down, the one cigar club in my town. no idea what that's going to look like, but I'm planning to wear latex jeans and boots regardless of what it looks like, and take my cigar and smoke my cigar in a cigar club and get somebody to cut it for me. They probably won't be my ashtray because I'm not quite sure I'm allowed to do that in this club, but at least it'll be a step in the right direction. But whatever it'll be a good experience, and I'm really excited.
I'm excited for you. I hope it's wonderful.
I'm sure it will be wonderful, but I'm just really amazed, and yeah, thank you for your time tonight. I really enjoyed chatting to you, and I'm really glad we got to connect, and I hope we get to do this again because I'd love to speak to you at a later stage about intent as well. I think what you have to say really sparks some stuff in my soul. But anyway. Rain of Fire says thank you and sends you lots of warm regards, and we're very grateful for your time tonight, sir.
Happy to. Thank you so much for having me.
And to all my amazing listeners, I hope you are finding a way to spend some time with yourselves and get some good fire play in. And I hope you have your tickets for Rain of Fire, because if you don't, what are you doing with your lives? You need to. We have our on-demand classes starting. We're recording some of them at the moment, so you're welcome to come and join us if you have a ticket and watch some of the recordings. They will all go on to our YouTube channel for on-demand from the 1st of July. You'll be able to access all the 101 stuff. And then at the end of July, we have an amazing lineup. This class schedule went live. We have some incredible educators. We're going to bring you some just bucket list stuff that you don't get to see every day. And we really want you to come and join us. If finances are a barrier to your participation, please reach out to us. We have some scholarship seats available. We'd really like to share our education, and we believe it should be available to all, no matter what your situation. So please use our DMs. We are happy to sort you out with a ticket. If you haven't registered on our Discord, do it so that you get all of this information. If you're not on our FetLife group, do it because we need to get you all this information. Yeah, and then wherever you are in the world, I hope you are having a blazing time. And from my dungeon in Cape Town, lots of love and kitten kisses.